The cardboard box was not heavy. 6 years at Voss Meridian had left Marcus Webb a framed photo of his daughter Maya, a stress ball shaped like a globe, and a coffee mug with her name on it, in letters she'd traced in crayon when she was 4. He carried all of that out of the third-floor conference room at 11:43 on a Thursday morning, without raising his voice, without asking for anything back, without giving Sandra Klein the scene she had clearly prepared for. Sandra had been ready for this. He could tell by the way the HR folder was already open when he walked in, by the way she'd asked 2 colleagues to stand just past the door, close enough to hear, too far to be officially part of it. She used the word commitment twice. She told him the company needed employees whose priorities didn't pull them in other directions. She did not mention the morning she'd entered as an absence, the morning Marcus had spent in the school principal's office, because his daughter had stepped between 2 other kids during a fight and needed her father there to speak for her. He had called in. He had completed his reports from the parking lot. None of that was in Sandra's folder. If you already feel it, that tightening in your chest, hit the like button and subscribe to Hidden Ledger. Drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you're watching from, because this story is just getting started. And the part they don't see coming? Keep watching. Marcus thanked her. He said he hoped the team would thrive. She blinked, waiting. He understood, for an argument, something she could reference later. He gave her nothing. At the elevator, he pressed the button and waited. The doors hadn't fully closed before it started. Applause from behind the conference room door, brief and clean, like punctuation someone had been building toward for months. Then Sandra's voice, clear enough to carry. That's how you make a decision. Someone laughed. Marcus stood in the elevator with the box in his arms and did the math. 7 weeks until the end of the school year. Enough in savings to cover 2 months after that. After which, the numbers stopped working in a way he could explain to Maya without frightening her. Outside, it was raining. He stood under the narrow overhang along the front wall and was trying to remember which lot he'd parked in when he noticed the woman. She was small, somewhere in her late 70s. He guessed, standing 4 feet to his left, with a canvas bag held over her head against the rain. A plain navy coat, already damp at the shoulders. The patient look of someone who had been waiting long enough to stop expecting anything soon. Before he could think about where the truck was, he wanted to back up, because the story of what happened next begins much earlier than a Thursday morning in April. Marcus had been raising Maya alone since she was 3. Her mother had left without a clear reason, the way some things end, not in argument, but in slow divergence. 2 people becoming strangers, before either of them said so out loud. There had been no scenes. Maya's mother existed in late birthday packages, in 12-minute calls, and the wary, carefully managed hope of a 9-year-old who had learned not to ask for more than was on offer. Marcus had made peace with this, the way you make peace with things you cannot change. He gave his energy to what was in front of him. Maya's school lunches, her swim lessons on Saturday mornings, the multiplication tables she still confused at bedtime. The nightmares that brought her down the hall to his room once or twice a month, where she would climb in without asking and fall asleep in 4 minutes, while he lay awake thinking about the electric bill. His mornings had a cadence he'd built so carefully, it had become its own kind of craft. Up at 6 o'clock, coffee started, Maya's lunch assembled while it brewed. Always 2 portions of whatever she'd declared the current acceptable fruit. Always the crackers she liked, and never the ones she didn't. Always a folded note on a post-it that said something small and specific, the kind of note that cost him 30 seconds and that she saved in a shoebox under her bed, a fact he pretended not to know. Breakfast on the table by 6:40. Maya downstairs by 6:50 if the morning was cooperative, 7:05 if it wasn't, at which point the conversation over cereal shifted from leisurely to efficient without him ever raising his voice. Out the door at 7:20, at the school gate by 7:35, at his desk by 8:02 on a good day. On a bad day, the kind Sandra had been counting, the school called. The bus was late. Maya had forgotten her library book, and the anxiety about returning it without the book was the kind that grew, that needed managing before it became the whole morning. Those days, Marcus arrived at 8:10, sometimes 8:15. He always made it up. He had never once ended a week in deficit on his logged hours. That was not in Sandra's folder either. He had taken the job at Voss Meridian, a mid-sized logistics and operations company with offices in 4 cities, because the schedule worked. 8 to 5, with enough flexibility on either end to drop Maya at school and be at pickup by 5:30. Over 6 years, he had been rated the top-performing operations analyst in his department for 3 of the last 4 review cycles. He had trained new hires, covered for colleagues during family emergencies, and stayed past dark on projects that weren't his when they were close to falling apart. The Dallas integration 2 years ago, the one that nearly collapsed under its own weight during the fourth quarter, had been salvaged using a framework Marcus built on a weekend and filed under another manager's name. He knew. He hadn't made a thing of it. What Marcus had built in 6 years was something the company couldn't name on a spreadsheet but couldn't have run without. When a new analyst arrived and needed to understand how the floor actually functioned, not the org chart version, but the real version, where the bottlenecks were, and who to call when the system was lying to you, they ended up at Marcus's desk. When the Memphis team missed a handoff, and the client was calling and no one wanted to be the person who escalated it, they called Marcus, who would look at the chain quietly and find the 2 things that had crossed and uncrossed them without anyone having to fall on a sword. People sent him problems at 7 in the morning because they knew he would have already read his email. They sent him problems on Friday afternoons because they knew he would answer before the weekend was out. In the 3 quarterly pulse surveys before Sandra arrived, Marcus's name appeared in the open comment fields of 11 separate responses. Not as a manager, not as a supervisor, just as the answer to the question, who makes your work possible? His direct manager at the time had flagged those surveys in a memo that was filed and never actioned. Then that manager was transferred to Phoenix, and Sandra Klein arrived from Chicago, and the floor became a different place. Sandra Klein had arrived 14 months ago from the Chicago office. Her file described her management style as results-driven, which meant, in practice, that presence was performance. If you were at your desk, you were committed. If you weren't, you weren't. She had no experience choosing between work and the rest of life and had structured her professional existence to make that choice unnecessary, which meant she had no framework for understanding the people who hadn't done the same. Over 14 months, she had documented Marcus's late arrivals in September. The team meeting he had joined by phone from a hospital waiting room when Maya's fever hit 104. 3 departures at 5:05 on evenings, when he had also come in at 7:30. She had counted those minutes and omitted the overtime. She had built, carefully and without malice, a case for someone she had already decided was the wrong kind of employee. What she had not bothered to learn was that Voss Meridian had a founder, that the founder still held 61% of its shares, that the founder had stepped back from operations 12 years ago because she believed good companies run better when the person who built them stops standing in every room, and that on a Thursday morning in April, the founder had woken up with the quiet conviction, the kind she no longer tried to explain to anyone, that it was time to walk the building again. Carol, the man who worked Voss Meridian's security desk every morning, recognized Eleanor Voss the moment she came through the lobby door. He looked up and started to stand. She shook her head, very slightly, and he sat back down. He said nothing, which was the right answer and the one she had always preferred. Eleanor walked the building for 2 hours without her name in front of her, the way she had done in the early years when the company had 40 employees, and she knew all of them by sight. She sat in the 3rd-floor break room for 11 minutes. A man came in to refill his coffee and left without making eye contact with her, which she found instructive. She listened to 2 people in the hallway talk about a deadline in the language of people who had given up expecting anything to go smoothly. Not frustrated, exactly, just adapted, the way you adapt to conditions that have been constant long enough to feel like weather. She noted that and moved on. She stopped at a workstation in the open floor area and looked at the whiteboards mounted along one wall. Someone had written a project timeline in 3 colors. The deadlines were ambitious. Several had been crossed out and rewritten in smaller handwriting. One had a small asterisk next to it with a note that read, in letters barely large enough to read, "Check with M. Webb before committing." That note was 4 months old, based on the project dates beside it. It had not been erased. She noted that too. She stopped in the 4th-floor conference room and looked at the framed company history on the wall, which had a dusty glass she had not noticed the last time she was here. Because the last time she was here there hadn't been dust yet. She was in that corridor when the applause came through the door. Brief, specific, the sound of a room that had been cued. She heard Sandra's voice carry through the wall. She kept walking. In the lobby, Carol answered 3 questions before she left. Yes, there had been an incident in the third-floor conference room. The name of the employee, after a moment's thought, Marcus Webb. She wrote it on the back of a receipt from her coat pocket and went outside to wait for her car service. The car was 40 minutes out. She was standing in the rain with the canvas bag over her head when the man with the cardboard box came through the revolving door. He set the box down on the dry strip of sidewalk, looked at the rain, and looked at her. He didn't appear to be calculating anything. He just appeared to see what was in front of him. "You waiting on a car?" She told him 40 minutes. He said he had a truck and wasn't going back inside. He offered her a ride. His truck was a 2011 Silverado with a sliding rear window that misted in damp weather and a passenger seat that needed pushing back by hand. He moved a swim bag off the floor without being asked, then held the door while she stepped up. She settled the canvas bag on her lap and looked at the dashboard. There was a drawing taped there, a house with a tilted chimney, 3 figures labeled in careful child's printing. Daddy, me, and our dog Pretzel. They did not own a dog. She could tell he knew this and didn't care. The coffee mug was in the cup holder. She recognized it from the box he'd been carrying. The radio was low. Old country, the unhurried kind. He didn't try to fill the silence as he drove. The rain came harder at the overpass. "Was that your office?" she said. "Until today." He didn't offer anything else. She didn't ask. They drove quietly for a few minutes, the kind of quiet that doesn't require management. "Do you have family nearby?" "My daughter. She's 9. A pause. "I'll be there when she gets out." "That part is fine." "What's her name?" "Maya." She looked at the drawing again. "Is she the one who made that?" "November." Keep meaning to frame something better. He hadn't moved it. She understood that he wouldn't. She watched his hands on the wheel. Not the hands of someone performing calm. The hands of someone who had decided how to carry the morning and was simply carrying it. "How long were you there?" 6 years. "Were you good at it?" He considered the question before answering. "I thought so." "What did you do?" "Operations analysis. Workflow systems. Gap work. The space between what gets decided in conference rooms and what actually happens on the floor. I tried to make sure the people in the middle didn't get forgotten." A pause. Shorter version, "I helped fix things when they broke." She said nothing. They turned off the main road and followed a 2-lane stretch through older neighborhoods. The houses set back behind trees that were just coming into leaf. She directed him through 2 turns. He followed. "What will you do?" He didn't perform optimism. "I have 2 months in savings. After that, I need something. I know people in the industry. Monday, I start calling." "You trust it'll come through?" "I trust I'll do everything I can to make it come through." That's not quite the same thing, but it's closer to honest. They passed under a low bridge. The rain was heavier there, drumming on the roof of the cab. She watched the road with him for a moment. "Does your daughter know yet?" "I told her I had an early day. I'll tell her the truth tonight." He shifted lanes. "She's 9. She'll ask the right questions, and I'd rather give her honest answers than talk around it and have her fill in the blanks." "What questions will she ask?" He thought for a moment. "She'll ask if we have to move. She'll ask if she can stay in her school. And she'll ask if I'm okay. And she'll watch my face while I answer because she doesn't fully trust verbal responses." A pause. "She got that from me." Eleanor had negotiated acquisitions worth more than $100 million. She had faced federal regulators and hostile board members, and investors who believed volume was a substitute for accuracy. She had never found any of that more instructive than the people she met when nobody thought she was paying attention. She was paying attention now. Something was specific about the way he drove. He checked his mirrors at the cadence of someone who had learned to keep track of what was behind him without making a production of it. When a delivery truck cut across the lane ahead of them, he slowed without comment. Not the sharp break of irritation, just a quiet release of the accelerator, then back up to speed. The kind of adjustment that didn't announce itself. "Do you drive often?" she asked. "Most mornings, school drop, work, school pickup, whatever Maya has in the evening. And on weekends, Saturday is swim, Sunday depends. Sometimes the grocery store, sometimes nowhere." He paused. "Maya calls Sunday our slow day. She designed the concept when she was 6 and has enforced it since." "What does a slow day look like?" "Pancakes. Something outside if the weather cooperates. A lot of negotiation about screen time that usually ends in a draw." He glanced at the road ahead. It's the best day of the week. She had read 1,000 profiles of the people who ran things. They tended, in her experience, to describe the best day of their week in terms of what they had accomplished. This man described his in terms of pancakes and a draw over screen time. She turned to look at him. He was watching the road. "You drove 25 minutes out of your way," she said. "In the rain, an hour after losing your job, for someone you don't know. You looked cold, and the rain was getting worse." He glanced at the mirror. "I should have suggested you wait inside. I didn't think to. You were a little distracted." "A little." They rode in quiet for another minute. The wipers kept their steady beat. She found she did not feel compelled to fill the silence, which was unusual. Most silences, in her professional life, were tactical. Someone waiting for someone else to speak first, to offer something they hadn't meant to offer. This one was just silence. The city thinned out and the trees got taller, and the addresses on the mailboxes got further apart. He pulled onto Edgemont Drive and stopped at the address. A brick house, wide porch, 2 oak trees flanking the front walk. He came around to open her door. She stepped down and turned to face him. "What's your name?" "Marcus." "Marcus Webb." She held his eyes for a moment. "I'm Eleanor Voss." The name took a half-second to land. Then it did. All of it at once. The lobby plaque, the framed history, the documents he had typed her name into 100 times over 6 years. He stood in the rain and said nothing. The name was everywhere in that building. It was on the brass plate in the lobby that people walked past every morning without reading it. It was on the founding document framed in the 3rd-floor conference room where his performance review had just ended. It was on the masthead of every major contract the company had ever signed, in letters small enough to overlook if you weren't looking. Eleanor Voss, founder and majority shareholder. The person who had decided, 34 years ago, that a logistics company could be built on something besides the grinding logic of whoever had the least leverage. He had typed her name into internal documents for 6 years. He had never expected to be standing next to her in the rain outside her house. He looked at her. She looked back at him, steady and unhurried, the same way she had looked at him across the front seat of his truck. Not measuring him, not deciding anything, just seeing. "Thank you for the ride," Eleanor said. "You're welcome," he said, because there was nothing else. She walked up the front path and let herself in without looking back. The porch light came on as she reached the door. Marcus stood at the curb until the rain had soaked through the shoulders of his jacket. Then he got back in the truck and sat there while the windows fogged over. He didn't drive for a long time. He sat in the quiet of the cab with the rain coming down on the roof and the old country station still playing at low volume. And he thought about nothing in particular, because there was too much to think about, and he didn't have the capacity for any of it yet. If this story found its way to you, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Hidden Ledger posts new stories every week, and the one after this one is already waiting. Your support is what keeps the ledger open. He didn't tell anyone who she was. That evening, he picked Maya up from after-school care at 5:28, made grilled cheese because it was fast and she loved it, and sat at the kitchen table working through job boards while she did homework across from him. She held her pencil at the wrong angle in the grip she'd developed on her own and refused to change. He had opened 4 tabs by 6:15. 2 were promising. 1 required relocation to a city 3 hours away, which he closed without reading past the first paragraph. The 4th was a contracting role that would pay less and have no benefits, which he kept open as a backup he hoped not to need. He sent a message to a former colleague named Dennis, who now ran operations for a shipping firm on the other side of the city. He kept it brief. Dennis had called him twice in the last year about a role that had since been filled by someone else. Marcus wrote 3 sentences and did not mention Sandra by name. He said he was back on the market and would welcome a conversation. He read it twice, changed 1 word, and sent it. Then he sat with his hands around his coffee mug and did the math 1 more time. The way you return to a number hoping it has changed. It had not changed. 2 months was 2 months. At 7 o'clock, Maya looked up. "Daddy, you've been making the same face for an hour." "What face?" "The one where you're deciding if something is bad." He closed the laptop. "I might need to find a new job." She put down her pencil. "Because someone wasn't fair to you?" Something like that. Maya thought about this the way she thought about most serious things, without rushing to reassure him, letting it sit for a moment first. Then, "You'll find something. You're really good at your job." "How do you know that?" Because whenever something goes wrong at work, people call you. She said it like a simple fact. Ella's dad always complains that nobody calls him. He laughed. The real kind. At bedtime, she said, if we have to move, it's okay, as long as we're still us. He sat on the edge of her bed, long after she fell asleep. He thought about his name on a receipt in a stranger's coat pocket. He thought about Eleanor in his passenger seat looking at the drawing on the dashboard and saying nothing about it, just looking at it. The way you look at something that tells you everything you need to know without requiring an explanation. He didn't know yet what that meant. He was too tired to work it out that night. 3 floors above where it had happened, Sandra Klein spent Thursday afternoon in motion. Emails approved. A vacation request signed off on. A stop by the desk of the analyst she'd already decided to move into Marcus's former responsibilities. She told him this was an opportunity. He said thank you and looked at his screen the moment she walked away. Sandra did not notice the way he looked at the screen. She was already walking toward the next thing. She sent an email to the team at 3:45 with the subject line, "Moving Forward," that outlined new expectations around desk hours and individual output tracking. She CC'd HR. It was, she believed, a necessary statement, a signal that the department was entering a more accountable phase. She reread it twice before sending. She was satisfied with the tone. At 4:15, her assistant appeared with the board chair's message. Friday at 9. Sandra wrote it in her calendar, noted the time zone, and began mentally outlining the quarterly figures she expected to discuss. Her department had hit its numbers. She had cleared a personnel issue that had been complicating the floor's performance record. She had, she believed, done exactly what she had been brought here to do. She did not know Carol had recognized Eleanor Voss. She did not know Eleanor had been in the building for 2 hours. She did not know the applause she had organized had traveled through the wall of a 4th-floor hallway where someone who owned 61% of the company had been walking past. She did not know Carol had answered 3 questions honestly before Eleanor left, or that Eleanor had spent 25 minutes in a stranger's truck and sat long enough in the passenger seat to understand something Sandra had spent 14 months actively not looking for. She went home and prepared talking points. She was still editing them at 11. At midnight, she decided they were good and went to sleep without any particular unease. That night, Eleanor Voss sat at her kitchen table with Marcus Webb's personnel file on one side and 14 months of Sandra's documentation on the other. She read without hurrying. She read the anonymous employee feedback submitted over the same period, 11 separate comments across 3 surveys, all pointing at the same name, none of them flagged for follow-up by anyone. She read the cross-functional project requests from 3 separate department heads in 3 separate quarters, each one asking by name for an analyst who did not report to them, which was not coincidence and had never been treated as one because no one had looked at all 3 requests in the same place at the same time. She read the Dallas integration memo. She noted the name in the signature line. She noted the name in the footnote that acknowledged the actual author of the methodology. She sat with that for a moment. She thought about Marcus in the truck, the 3 sentences he had used to describe 6 years of work, the specific care with which he had said, "I tried to make sure the people in the middle didn't get forgotten." The way he had answered her question about Maya's future questions without sentimentality, as if parenting were a problem he had studied and kept studying. She had built this company by being the kind of person who read footnotes. She picked up the phone and called the board chair at 9:45. The boardroom on the executive floor held a long table and 12 chairs and east-facing windows. At 9:06 on Friday morning, Sandra took her seat across from the board chair and 2 senior directors she recognized from annual meetings. Eleanor Voss was already sitting at the far end of the table. Sandra's face ran through several expressions in the space of 2 seconds and landed on none of them. The board chair said, "Mrs. Voss asked to be present for this conversation." Sandra said, "Of course." Her voice was level. Under the table, her hands were not. Eleanor did not build toward anything. "I visited the building on Thursday. I do this occasionally without announcing it, because I want to see what a building looks like when it doesn't know I'm coming." She set her canvas bag on the chair beside her. "While I was there, I observed the termination of your operations analyst Marcus Webb. I read his personnel file that evening. I also read the anonymous feedback submitted about his work by 11 members of your department over the past 14 months. Sandra opened her mouth. I haven't finished, Eleanor said. The room settled. In the 34 years I spent building this company, the quality I was least able to document on paper was the ability to make other people's work possible. It doesn't appear in individual output reports. The only way you know someone has it is that when they leave, things get harder in ways you cannot locate. She looked at Sandra without raising her voice. Marcus Webb had it. The surveys said so. 3 cross-functional teams requesting him by name over 2 years said so. The Dallas integration that came in 4 days early under someone else's name said so. She placed a folder on the table without opening it. I also reviewed your 14 months of documentation on Mr. Webb. It reflects, with considerable consistency, a standard applied to him that does not appear to have been applied to others in the department facing equivalent circumstances. A pause. I have managed people for a long time. I understand the difference between documentation that records performance and documentation that builds a case. This was the second kind. She let that sit. I drove home Thursday afternoon in the truck of the man you fired. He had no idea who I was. He moved a child's swim bag off the passenger seat so I could sit down, drove 25 minutes beyond where he needed to go, and wouldn't take any payment for it. When I asked what he planned to do next, he said he was going to spend the weekend with his daughter and start making calls Monday morning. A pause. He wasn't bitter. He was not performing composure for an audience. He was just a man who had already decided how to carry a hard day, and he was carrying it. She placed a folder on the table. That is the kind of person this company was built to keep. The kind a good manager protects. The kind, she said, that a poor one removes when no one is watching. She sat back. The room stayed quiet for a moment that felt longer than it was. Sandra did not speak. There was nothing in the room for her certainty to hold on to anymore. Sandra was removed from her role as regional director that morning, pending a full review of her conduct over the preceding 14 months. She sat across the table while the board chair read the decision, and she said very little, because there was very little that would help. The folder sat between them and she did not reach for it. She understood, now, what was in it. She had written most of it herself. The board chair handled it in the language boards always use: realignment, cultural direction, but everyone in the room understood what was happening. The folder stayed on the table after Eleanor left. Nobody reached for it. There was no applause. Nobody celebrated. What the floor noticed, in the hour after the meeting, was the absence of Sandra's voice. Her office was quiet. Her assistant was not at his desk. By lunchtime, the 2 analysts closest to her office were whispering, and by 2 in the afternoon, something had moved through the department the way information always moves through a floor. Sideways, in low voices, faster than anyone announces it officially. Marcus got the call at 10:14, not from HR, from the board chair's office directly. That detail told him, before a single word was spoken, that something different was happening. He was asked to come in at 2 o'clock. He was told someone would explain when he arrived. He was shown to the 4th floor conference room. The board chair was there, a senior director, and a woman in a plain navy coat who stood up when Marcus walked in. He recognized her without any difficulty. I believe an explanation is owed, Eleanor said. She told him what she'd found in the file, what the surveys had contained, what the board had decided that morning. She told him plainly, without making it larger than it was. The analysis you filed under the Dallas project in the 4th quarter 2 years ago, she said. The methodology. I want you to know that I know whose work that was. He looked at her for a moment. It didn't need to be under my name to be useful. No, she said, but it needed to be acknowledged. She held his eyes until he nodded. Then, the operations director position has been vacant for 6 months. We've been trying to fill it externally. We'd like to offer it to you. He looked at the table for a moment. The hours. I have a daughter. I need to be there for pickup at 5:30. That can be accommodated. We'll put it in the letter. A pause. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything yet. The question is whether you want to come back. He thought of the mug on his kitchen table, the drawing on the dashboard, Maya's voice, matter of fact in the back seat. As long as we're still us. Yes, he said. I'd like to come back. The colleague who had stayed silent during the firing, a man named Brent, 2 desks from Marcus's old seat, who had looked at his shoes while the applause was happening, stopped by the doorway that afternoon to say he was glad Marcus was back. He didn't explain why he hadn't spoken during the firing. He didn't offer an excuse or an apology. He said he was glad, and Marcus looked at him for a moment and understood what it had cost him to walk down that hallway and say a small thing that couldn't undo a larger silence. Marcus had known Brent for 4 years. Brent was not a bad person. He was a person who had made a choice in a moment when the cost of making the other choice felt too high, and who was now standing in a doorway trying to account for that in the only way available to him, which was just showing up. Marcus had always believed those moments mattered, even when they arrived late. He still believed it. He said, "Thanks, Brent. I'll see you Monday." That was all it needed to be. The 2 new analysts Marcus had trained 18 months ago both sent messages that Friday afternoon, within an hour of each other, saying some version of the same thing. They were glad to hear it. They hoped it was permanent, and if there was anything they could do. Marcus replied to both, and meant it when he said it was good to hear from them. Gloria, the receptionist on the 3rd floor who had slipped him a granola bar on his way out, and said, "I'm sorry, honey," when no one was looking. She was the first person Marcus found when he came back in on Monday morning. "Thank you," he said. "For the other day." She waved a hand. It was nothing. It wasn't nothing. He said it calmly, without turning it into a moment. She looked at him for a beat and then nodded, accepting it, and that was the right end to that conversation. The operations director role changed the math. The salary brought the savings account back to a number that didn't require creative interpretation. The hours were written into the offer letter as discussed, which meant Maya stayed in the same school, the same house with the slightly listing chimneys she'd drawn from memory, the same Saturday swim lessons where Marcus sat in the bleachers answering emails with one eye on the water. The drawing stayed on the dashboard. The mug stayed in the cup holder. The job he came back to was larger than the one he'd left, but the life he came back to was the same life, which was what he had needed it to be all along. Eleanor called once, 3 weeks later, not about the role, to ask about Maya. Marcus told her about the spelling bee Maya had won that Friday, and how Maya had accepted the trophy with the guarded consideration she brought to good news that arrived before she'd decided to trust it, holding it at arm's length for a moment, looking at it as if it might still turn out to be something else. Eleanor laughed. It came without warning, the real kind. Marcus said, "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "When we were in the truck, did you know then what you were going to do?" A pause. "I knew what the building had shown me. I'd been watching the culture numbers for 3 quarters and didn't like what I was reading. Your file that night made you the specific case, the survey names, the Dallas footnote, the 3 separate departments that kept asking for you by name. But the ride told me something those documents confirmed." Another pause. The people who choose to be decent when they have every reason not to, when the day has already cost them more than it should have. You spend enough years building something and you learn those are the people a company cannot afford to lose. He didn't have an answer for that. She didn't appear to need one. That evening he picked Maya up from school and told her the whole story. She listened from the back seat with her feet tucked under her, looking out the window, the way she always listened to things she wanted to hold on to. He told her about the conference room, and the box, and Sandra's voice carrying through the wall. He told her about the woman in the rain outside the building, the truck, the drawing on the dashboard that Eleanor had looked at. He told her about standing in the rain on Edgemont Drive and hearing a name he had typed into documents 100 times, said back to him by the person it belonged to. He told her about the file, about 11 comments in 3 surveys, about the Dallas footnote, about a folder that had been built to prove something that was not true, and a woman who had read it at midnight and known the difference. He told her he was going back to the same building on Monday, that he would have a bigger job and the same pickup time, and that the mug was staying in the cup holder. Maya was quiet for a long time when he finished. They were nearly home when she said, "Did you know who she was when you helped her?" "No," Marcus said. She looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror. She had the focused expression she got when something needed to be said correctly. "Then you did it right." Her voice was certain, the matter-of-fact certainty she applied to things that seemed obvious to her. "If you'd known, it would have been different. It would have been about the outcome instead of about her." He thought about that for the rest of the drive home. He thought about it while he made dinner, and Maya set the table with the careful ceremony she brought to tasks she decided mattered. He thought about it after she was asleep, sitting at the kitchen table with the coffee mug in front of him, the one with her crayon letters fading at the rims now, the one that had written out in a box and written back in again, and the job board tabs still open on the laptop that he no longer needed. Dennis had replied to his message at 7:22 that evening. The subject line was, "Call me tomorrow. Glad you reached out." Marcus read it, wrote back a single sentence of thanks, and closed the laptop. He sat in the quiet of the kitchen for a while. The house around him was ordinary and specific, and the slightly warped cabinet door, the refrigerator's familiar hum, the glow of the nightlight Maya insisted on in the hallway, even though she had long since stopped being afraid of the dark. He had almost lost this. He had driven a stranger home in the rain, and the stranger had read a footnote, and he had not lost this. The ledger doesn't record what you knew when you made your choice. It records what you did. Acts of decency stand on their own, independent of the audience, independent of who the stranger turns out to be, independent of what the morning had already cost you before you made them. Marcus had driven an elderly woman home in the rain because she was cold and the rain was getting worse. The rest was just the world paying attention. Thank you for staying until the balance was restored. The people who watch to the end are the ones who understand why the ledger matters. If this story stayed with you, the videos on your screen right now are ready to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, the ledger has your name. Hidden Ledger,